This is going to be our first day of solving trig equations, so we're going to keep them basic and not do many things with replacements. First thing we're going to do, and we're going to do two parts for this, we're going to solve for the principal values in part A, and then we're going to solve over the interval 0 to 360. So it's a good connection with what we did in the previous lesson where we found the inverses, because we'll start with the principal values. Okay, so our first equation is going to be 2 sine x is equal to 1. There's really not a lot of solving to do for this. We're going to do sine x is equal to 1/2. And then for principal values, it's really like if we were solving this, we would do the inverse sine of both sides to cancel out the sine. Now, I'm not going to show this step in future problems. So x would come out to be the sine inverse. Now, since we're solving an equation, this is a similarities to the situation that we talked about previously, the difference between x squared is equal to 4 and taking the square root, getting your two answers of plus or minus 2, as opposed to just taking the square root of the value and getting the principal value of 2. So since the first part asks for just the principal values, we're looking at, like we did previously, quadrants 1 and 4 for sine, and it's quadrant 1 that we are going to go to because it's positive. And the principal value for that is 30 degrees. So 30 degrees is our answer for part A. For part B, if we're going 0 to 360, we want all the values in the quadrant. So we want to think about, for that, all students take calculus as opposed to our principal value quadrants. And now we're looking at, okay, sine is positive in the first two quadrants. So my quadrant 1 angle is 30 degrees. We already got that answer. And then in my quadrant 2, you can use your reference angle rules and do 180 minus. So this would be 150 as our other answer. And then the rules I'm putting here are slightly different than the rules for finding the reference angle. It's if you have the reference angle, this is what you would do in each of the quadrants to come up with the angle in that quadrant. We did a little bit of this in the first unit, so that part is a little bit of a review. Now, for this section also, I didn't need my calculator. So if they come out to values that are exact, you won't need your calculator. In a separate video, I will show you how to do the calculator component of this if you need to use it. Okay, so let's go on to another equation. Our second one is going to involve factoring and solving. Now, I could do this one without factoring, but there are two options, but I do want to be careful with this, especially because the square root component could come into play here. So one option for this would be to divide by 4 and square root both sides. I like the factoring option because you most likely will not forget to do plus or minus with this. So if I make this 4 cosine squared minus 1, I can factor using difference of squares. But that's not the only way that this could be solved. I just think it's a good idea because then when you set each of those equal to 0 and solve it, you will get the positive 1/2 and the negative 1/2. And if you do it with square rooting, you might forget to do the negative. Now, if we're looking for principal values, cosine has principal values in the first and the second quadrant. So we're actually getting both answers here because we have a positive and a negative. So in the first quadrant, cosine inverse of 1/2 is 60 degrees. Second quadrant, you would do 180 minus 60, so that would give you 120. So those would be your principal value answers. And then in part B, if we're doing 0 to 360, those will be included, but we'll have additional ones. So for the negative 1/2, you are looking at quadrants 2 and 3 with the reference angle of 60, and the positive 1/2, you're looking at quadrants 1 and 4. So we already know quadrant 1 is 60, quadrant 2 is 120, but you are using 60 as the reference angle. So if I do 180 plus 60, that's going to give me my quadrant 3 angle. If I do 360 minus 60, that will give me my quadrant 4 angle. So you actually get the angles in all 4 quadrants for this one, because you had the difference of squares, and you end up getting the plus and minus, or the positive and negative version of that fraction. Now, it is possible to check all of your answers with your calculator if this were on a calculator section. So they may or may not be, but these are good ones that you can plug back into your original question to check. And when I go over in the calculator video how to plug in to find the answers, I will talk about or show you how to do that checking. All right, so we're going to do a couple more factoring ones. If you need to pause for a minute, this video is going to get a little bit long since we're doing 2 more examples here. Actually, change my mind, we're going to do 1 more, and then I'll do a factoring and a quadratic formula one in a second video. Next factoring is pretty basic, so it shouldn't take too long to do. All right, so here, common mistake that people might do, especially if this other sign x is on the other side, is divide out a sign. That is a big mistake because you will eliminate a factor. So anytime you think you want to divide, it means you are going to want to find a GCF. In this case, our greatest common factor is sine of x. So you can take out a trig function as a common factor. We'll be left with 2 sine x plus 1. This is also one that wouldn't require using your calculator because they're going to be exact answers. So we get sine x equals 0, and we get 2 sine x plus 1 is 0, which is sine x is equal to negative 1/2. Now, if we're looking at 0, we have to think about the point that happens at 0. Or when sine is 0 would be when the y value is 0, and that's going to happen at 2 different spots. So remember, sine is our y value. That's going to happen at 0 and at 180. But if we're talking about principal values, we're talking about values that fall between the first and the fourth quadrant. So if I'm looking at these quadrants and kind of combining them together, 0 is going to be the principal value answer for that first one, because that falls between negative 90 and 90. And then the other answer, sine x equals negative 1/2, the reference angle for this is 30. So remember, if we're looking at the fourth quadrant for that, we're actually going to put negative 30 because we want the answers for our principal values for sine to be between negative 90 and 90. So it's almost like that is our set of directions. Find all the angles between that set of numbers. And our second is between 0 and 360 because that includes all of our quadrants. So for 0 degrees is one of them, and then we said 180 is the other one. And that includes all of them between 0 and 360. And then sine is negative. All students take calculus in quadrants 3 and 4. But we want those answers to be between 0 and 360. So for quadrant 3, we're going to take our reference angle. We're going to add to 180. And And for quadrant 4, we're going to subtract from 360. So I'm just writing that underneath. You don't need to put that information in there. All right, and those are all your answers. Should really be writing x equals here from 0 to 360. You don't have to write them in numerical order, although that happened here, that worked out. These would all be good questions to also put on a no calculator part because these are all nice exact value answers. All right, in the next video, that will not be the case because we'll be factoring ones that don't come out as nicely and also using quadratic formula for one of them.